My name is Ashish Verma. I'm the U.S. Chief Data Analytics Officer for Deloitte. I'm a principal at Deloitte. And I know this is a topic that I get asked about often, which is what are the expectations on data when you're going to build something that is that centric to AI? So I'll let everybody introduce themselves, and we'll shed some light on the things that at least we see from our perspective and our lens in the role. So let's start with you, Jean. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your role in the organization when it comes to adopting AI.
Yeah, I'm Jean Olive. I'm the CIO at John Hancock. I've been in technology my whole career. This is my first kind of stint in financial services and insurance, so it's very different but fun. I have many use cases. So we have a overall governance. John Hancock's a Manulife company. We have a really strong investment in AI at the company level, and so I'm part of the looking at what we're doing across the enterprise, but then implementing use cases for John Hancock.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, it's great to be here. The financial services, especially insurance companies, are the original AI companies, right? I mean, when you look at their history. Yeah. Originally from Brockton, Mass, local. First part of my career, spent about a dozen years at Harvard Business School, created the first e-commerce course there, actually had an expert systems course back in the 80s. Then joined a consulting firm called Diamond Technology Partners for a dozen years. We sold ourselves to PricewaterhouseCoopers. And then I retired from there. And then 2 years ago started research and best practices company called GAI Insights here in Newton, Mass. And we help answer questions like this. We also do a daily news show, which starts, it's nutty. We do it every day, and it's fun. It's really exciting.
Go ahead, Hari.
Hi, my name is Hari Balakrishnan. I'm a professor at CSAIL. I'm also the founder and CTO of a company, Cambridge Mobile Telematics. Our mission is to make driving safe and sustainable around the world. We work with a lot of AI and machine learning on primarily sensor data, like accelerometer data, gyroscope data, and GPS data. Work with a large number of insurance companies, both in the US and abroad, on telematics-based safety programs, also companies like Uber, and have been doing a lot of work with AI in our company for about 10 to 15 years, and in my academic research as well, both with sensor data and with now increasingly large language models.
All right, I'll go to Eugene, since you get asked about this as much as I do. So when boards and executives start asking about ROI on AI and investments, you know what they're asking about. They're asking about value for money. So tell us a little bit about when you look at strategic investments at John Hancock, are there any success criteria that you look at the AI investments with a lens towards that you can share?
Yeah, I think we're moving, like everything, any kind of technology spend, right, has to have a return on your investment. And I think in the past, it was more really focused on how you can be more productive, right, or how you take out steps, or how you're driving inefficiencies in the organization. But now I feel like we're getting to that point. We're moving much faster away from the productivity to really changing the way that we work. And that's what's going to be the differentiator, and not only changing the way we work, but how is AI going to enable sales growth, right? Enable more customers, or better through personalization, better insights, and making those decisions so that we really can help the overall. You're moving to more top line opportunities versus the traditional bottom line.
Yeah, we're seeing a similar thing. We have a cutesy little acronym we call EAT, which is you have to educate, apply, and transform. And so we're moving from education to application, then you can start thinking about transforming it. There's a fundamental thing that people are, I think, not taking into account, which is boards of directors. I've been on a bunch of public boards and private boards and so forth. I've been a named officer. And you can look up the comp structure, short-term, long-term comp of any board member and any named officer. If you look at them and you say, okay, fundamentally what's going on here is we're going to have a more capital-intensive business, right? Because you're going to build assets, you're going to build logic, you're going to build data, and so forth. The incentive structures actually disincent that in most companies that should be doing this transformation. That they're incented on something like EBITDA or NOPAT or something, and some of them even get to add back in the amortization of acquisitions, so they can go buy growth. And what you really need is an operational transformation set of measures I think you need EBITDAR, where you add back in research and development, and then in the longer term stuff, you do a return on asset measure, because that's, I think, what. But if we don't have that kind of transformational incentive system at the top of organizations, we're not going to get there.
I agree, actually. It's one of the things I talk to people about. There's only so much productivity metrics that you can build into an ROI. After that, you have to look at something different.
Yeah, and if you're doing big trade-offs,
yeah,
you need very senior executive action to transform a business, right? You can't ask some poor person running a sales organization or whatever to change all that stuff. It's out of their scope.
That's right.
Yeah, so in our case, so I'm the chairman of the board, and obviously we've had a number of conversations. Our team, we've broken it down into 3 areas, and now we're not a company with thousands and thousands of employees. We have about 500 employees. So for us, the return on investment and everything about AI boils down to one of 3 categories. I would put this in increasing order of difficulty. The first one is increasing velocity. A lot of this has to do with productivity gains. It's not just on coding, it's everything. You have RFPs to respond to. We built a tool to use AI to do it. All aspects of it. So this is about just increasing velocity. The second, interestingly for us, is increasing reliability. Every time there's a fault of any kind, a failure of any kind, there's a massive opportunity cost, because it might only take 2 days to fix the problem, but you now have 5% or 10% of your engineers and product people involved in that. And the problem with that type of work with engineering is context switching is an absolute killer. It's not like, if I'm selling something, I can get on a 20 sales call a day. It's like I flip it, it's very fast. But if I lose the train of thought on what I'm doing because an IRT shows up, then there's a real problem and so therefore using AI for reliability is a big issue. And I think we're doing a good job of that. And the third is, we're sitting on, massive amounts of data. We have 45 million users who use our programs or have used our programs, 65 petabytes of data, and there's revenue generating opportunities, new value to be created. And everyone thinks it's very easy to do, but there's a lot of constraints and a lot of creativity that's needed to do that. So bottom line, velocity, reliability, and revenue.
So interesting.
Go ahead.
There's a recent study that just came out, I think last week or the week before, and Kareem Lakhani and Ethan Mollick are 2 of the 10 authors on it. They did a thing at Procter & Gamble where they basically took individual with AI, team with AI. An individual with AI outdid the team, and the team with AI outdid everything. And one of the things that was interesting, when you talk about context switching, they do report, and we all know that these models are great at translating from English to Hindi to whatever, right? But they're also great, at least they talk about it a little bit in the paper, of translating across different levels of expertise. I think of that as vertical, and then across domains like horizontal. So they could get the team all up on the same page faster, which I thought was fascinating from a productivity, because when you're dealing complex interdependent work, you need everybody in the same. How much time have we all wasted in meetings where you're just trying to get everybody on the same page from expertise and egos and blah blah blah, and actuarial versus sales. Not that ever happens at your place.
I think you went there. I'm going to ask you this, right? And I'll ask all 3 of you this. I think when you start experimenting, you realize either you don't have the data or it's not the right hygiene. And this is something that most chief data officers that I speak to, and I experienced this personally at Deloitte, every time we started the process of doing something, a discrete use case, we realized we didn't have enough of, or we didn't have at all. Is that something that's common? And then do you have a chief data analytics officer that's a strategic partner on this journey with you?
We have,
Sorry.
we have like we have the chief data officer, we have the head of AI, Jay Ufan, who was here this morning, and then we have the CIO, the technologist. Is that 3? And the data has to be in the lake, and now we've moved to even making sure that the data is clean in the data lake. So you want to do any use cases, we've learned enough that we're not going to go from data sources everywhere, and getting the data into the lake and then modernizing the data. So doing that upfront work has been very beneficial for us. We're also finding too that even when you think you have good data, the interconnections, this field's missing,
That's
and
right.
the integrity of the data. The data might be good quality, but the integrity is not there. So, I think the same challenge we've had for how long, right?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting question. I would say that when I look at the evolution of AI, it used to be that you had to have really supervised models and everything had to be properly labeled. And the joke I make when I teach is, 90% of machine learning data science problems is cleaning up the data, and 10% is whatever you learned in your courses to apply it. And I think that one of the things that's changing now, and I think organizations that have access to enough data can benefit from, is to think about building foundation models with the data one has. And this now works with language. And these things, depending on the type of data, they're quite able to handle noise, but also handle missing data and make reasonable assumptions on interpolating or even extrapolating. You might get mistakes, and applications at a higher level have to deal with that. So I think that to the extent one can apply maybe a foundation model or maybe some of the underlying technologies, and we've done this with, say, transformers or equivalent models that are the lower layer, you could start to make progress even when the data doesn't look as clean as it needed to be when you were in a mode where you were essentially learning from a lot of labeled data. The other use case is few-shot learning, where you give a few examples and then the foundation models are able to learn. So I think I'm pretty optimistic about it. We've seen the success in language, and I think we'll start to see the successes in other types of structured or semi-structured data.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with both. Another interesting kind of trend we're seeing is that explainability is causing people to create new data to tag it through the life cycle process. So you have, like, Seeker's a vendor that does that, so it makes for way more explainability. I think it's A21, the Paul Allen think tank just came out 2 days ago with this thing. Was it Folamo? Anyways, the ability to tag the explainability of the data back up to the top. So I think that's a massive thing, right? We have the cleaning and the explainability. If you're going to have trust, you absolutely have to clean, but then you also have to be able to explain the relationships.
Yeah, and you'll start to see, right, like one of the things that I get pitched a lot about is synthetic data vendors, right? They basically pretty much create longitudinal data sets for any domain, right? And I get one of those phone calls every week. And I'm curious how many synthetic data startups you can
I mean, there's a couple of things about this version of the AI revolution that still just blow my mind. The fact that you can improve an analysis by generating synthetic data was just not intuitively obvious to me at all. I mean, that's just like, well, wait a second, there's only so much information I can generate in synthetic data that it's like, where, you know what I mean? It's like, how does that work? I mean, I know how it works, but how does that work? There's I think there's that. And the other thing is, I just never had thought that neural nets plus massive amounts of data would give us what we have with a transformer algorithm. I mean, it's still a miracle to me that the thing works.
Gene, you've been in a bunch of different industries before you got to insurance. So any sector-specific nuances that you feel sitting in your role right now that you've encountered enabling AI at scale that jumps to mind?
Well, I think probably the biggest, like, enabling a scale is really like the adoption and getting that. I think we still have a fear, right? It's not like, everybody here is a technologist and on board, but that's not really where we're going. But I think if you talk a lot about philosophy, but how can we do creativity, and how can we really, like, nuance, to think about what nuance. In my prior role, I was, working with Best Buy Health and, looking at, remote patient monitoring and care at home and keeping people in their care at home. And, like, just something like taking that experience and creating the health record that can go right into your, your Epic systems is life-changing, because you're letting when you can let people connect with other people, whether it's your patient, whether it's your customer, whether it's your producers, that's, to me, is really where the real power is, getting that velocity, be enabling connectivity in that human factor. And I don't think we talk about it that enough. We really think about it as like, oh, it's, it's just faster in productivity. It's going to take away these jobs, and, we're going to be different. But, for my developers, if I can get them all, using the co-pilot that can help them, then they can move into user experience and human factor design, and, connect back to, the people who are using our apps. What do you like? And they don't have that time. So free up that energy and get that creativity. And I think that's what, really, with that human factor, I think we need to think more of it, because it's really changing the world. And I mean, unfortunately, not, all the IDNs, not everybody has the investments to invest in this technology. Right. But if you can go into your physician and have a real conversation, and they're not like, Oh, so yeah, change your medication, right? And you do this, and then at home, then they have to go back at night, the pajama time, and transcribe everything. I mean, you think about we have a shortage, right? How can we eliminate some of these real problems that we have within our society?
I concur with you, right? Like there was a very interesting dialogue at the reception last night about sort of the human aspect and the change management that is sort of an important component of who's looking at that. So I found that dialogue pretty interesting, sitting in the back of the room listening to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I did some research ages ago with a woman named Dorothy Barton, who's over at Harvard Business School, and she had this great phrase. She called them signature skills. And she said that when people identify if their signature skills are the way the work is done, not the output of the work, they have a really hard time with technological transformation. Whereas if they attach their pride or identity, whatever, to the outcome of the work, then it's a lot easier. And that always stuck with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in terms of sector specific, there's lots of nuances and differences, but also within a sector, depending on the type of project. So my experience is, first of all, there's on the friction side of it, there's compliance, regulation, and change management. These are pretty significant, especially the change management side, because you change some models and the outputs change, and now lots of things on the downstream processes have to change. My company, we work with a lot of insurance companies and mobility companies, so we use AI on telematics sensor data for insurers to price insurance, for example, or for Uber to decide who's a good driver and who's not, so Uber gives better incentives to the good drivers. Now, you cannot just, we come up with a better model for predictivity. We can't just go and change these things because people's prices get affected, people's income gets affected. So there's an entire change management process. So, our algorithm development might happen within less than a quarter, and we can test it out in, say 6-8 weeks. It may take 2 years to get it out in the field. The types of projects where AI benefits, I think there's sort of, you could think of it like, in my experience, in the following way. The best projects to start with are when you deploy to, say, 10% of the users or 10% of the, whatever the size is, you get a little more than 10% of the benefit. You might get 20-30% of the benefit. So in other words, as you start to deploy it, the benefits are a little bit superlinear. That's useful. Conversely, there are projects where in order to see any benefit, because the operational changes are so significant, you deploy to 10%, nothing really moves, and you have to deploy to 50-60% before something has to move. So in the insurance space, in terms of pricing, you kind of deploy to 10-20%, you start to see profitability improvements as you roll it out. But if you look at claims, because it's so heavy operationally, you can deploy something to 5-10% of the users, but the claims organization in auto might have 10,000 adjusters, and unless enough claims come in with the AI capability, it doesn't move the needle. So picking and choosing these projects, I think, is pretty important. So even within a sector, there are different types of projects where one has to be very strategic about how one goes about it.
I hear that all the time, right? Like about the nuance of the impact or the size of the impact is not universal, right? And people ask me for frameworks all the time that sort of covers both ends of the spectrum, right? Where you have a low volume of deployment but a high impact, and you have a high volume of deployment but not that great an impact. So great. No conversation is going to be complete without talking about the word agent. So I'll let everybody do their 30-second spiel on do you have agents in your universe, or do you have agents in your foresight or on a roadmap?
Definitely have agents. I mean, especially with some of the big platforms that we're leveraging, Adobe, Salesforce. My concern is that we're using the agents. We're making the right decisions, whether it's a use case, build it on your own, or you use an agent. That's the challenge for me. Like using the right tech capability at the right time.
Agents are huge. I think we've got a lot of examples in things like program trading, object-oriented programming, a bunch of other things that we can learn from. But yeah, I think we'll have massive amounts of quasi-markets. The other thing is, from an educational perspective, agents are going to be huge because the operating system of humanity is conversation, and now we have a silicon hive mind that's part of that conversation.
Agent.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything new to add. I think I certainly see amongst our customers a lot of use for for agents and just going to change things. In our own specific technologies, we haven't seen it as having as much of an impact. But that might also just be that I and my team were not creative enough to figure out how to use them yet.
All right, so we have time for maybe a couple of questions in the audience if anybody has a question.
The end of the day.
That's great. All right. Yeah, here, we got a question.
So, my question really has to do with the expectations from the board as it relates to
The question is, what does the board expect for responsible AI? Just to repeat the
I'll give you my perspective, right? So when I talk to my board and other boards, right, like one of the biggest things, I think the aspect of what happens to a brand is sort of dictates the discussion a lot more. And what I talk about is that's one aspect of how it is going to impact if things go south, right? But in reality, if you look at the annotation of just the broad diversity of data set that we have to build, that eventually write the algorithms on, that attribution aspect of the data needs to be diverse enough, responsible enough is what's going to sort of answer the outcome on, is the algorithm or is the outcome of the algorithm responsible enough? So I think we've had to do work when we start this experimentation on our end about ethical and responsible AI, and I was hearing Andrew talk about it, right? The application is sort of where you start to worry about the technology itself is not, ethical or unethical. The applicability of the technology is what makes it ethical and not ethical, and that's the thing that we focus on mostly. But I'll see if anybody has anything else to add.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this quite a bit. And in our case, the answer stems from the company's values. We've always been very data-oriented, data-driven, and it involves people's driving data. So I think one of the values, and it's an ethical value, it is independent of AI, but it basically says anything, whether it's a human algorithm, AI, whatever, would you want the outcome to happen to your data, to you as an individual, as me as an employee, or me as a founder, or whatever? If the answer is yes, then you're allowed to do it. If the answer is no, you shouldn't. So that's a very simple way to think about it from a purely what's the values of the company standpoint. And I think it'll apply to whether it's an AI or whatever future technology there might be that we bring to bear.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you.
I think that
Thank
thing's
you.
flashing right.
I think the big zero red's time to go.